comedian, don't you dare look at a clock. We don't do that.
Amen. Amen. Well, I don't have a watch anymore, so that helps. And I don't have to be anywhere. I don't know what time services start tonight. I think like 6:30 or 7, so I'm all right. No, I love what the Lord's doing, and that's why I love coming here, just because you all don't care about anything but the Lord.
Yeah.
And man, I'd rather be somewhere like this any day than somewhere where the Lord's like just handcuffed. I am a little concerned though, because every time I come here, something significant happens in my life. So, so I'm like, Lord, I don't know what it is. April texted and said, I want to get a puppy. I'm hoping that's it. Oh, and you know, she did. She sent me these pictures. She's like, this is what it is. And I'm like, oh, that's really cute. And then like I went back and looked at it a little bit later, and I realized that she actually went and looked at it, and the picture was her holding it. It just took me 2 hours to realize. I'm like, it's done over with. Why are you even asking me? Oh, no. As Josh, I seriously love you, love Whitney, I love y'all's family. I really, truly do. You all are really blessed to have them as your pastoral family, because they're a rare breed. They really, truly are. Been blessed to be all around this country the last several years. There's very few people like your pastors. Really, truly, there are. And I tell Whitney and Josh Tyree stories all over the place. I really do. Just your faithfulness, and when others would have quit, you didn't. Just honor you guys. Really, truly do. We'll share from John 21 this morning. And this has been a passage I've studied out last 6-7 months, and I think there's some really profound truths in here, because help me understand that as you start pursuing the Lord, of course things happen, but things happen to try to discourage you from pursuing the Lord.
Yeah.
Right? Things happen to try to get you to go back into the way that you were prior to that encounter. And it's up to us what we do with that encounter. It's up to us to whether we're going to continue to press in and seek the Lord, or whether we're going to shrink back and quit. And give me 3 or 4 people that say, I will not be moved. Yeah. Right? Give me that any day. And so that's what I'm going to share on this morning, because I do believe it's fascinating. I tell you, when I was on the road full time as evangelist, one of the scariest things to do is go back to the same church multiple years in a row. One, I don't remember what in the world I share, and I don't record it. Okay, but 2, it's just true. But 2, it's scary because when you get to travel and go speak into places, you want them to be better the next year than they were than the time that you went to it previously. That's your goal. Not necessarily numerically, that's always nice, but you want them to be further along. And so there'll be some places you go to and God moves and people's getting touched and healed and delivered, saved, and then you go back next year and what in the world happened? Right? What happened? And here, that's not even a thought, because I'm man, I can't wait to see what's happened this last year, because I know that you all steward what the Lord's doing. And so anyway, so John 21, I really need to get into this because there's a lot here in this text. It says, after these things, Jesus manifested himself again to the disciples. This is John 21, verse 1. It says, he manifested himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias, and he manifested himself in this way. Simon Peter and Thomas called Didymus, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples were going together. Simon Peter said to them, I'm going fishing. And they said, we'll come with you. Now, I'm going to really hammer this I'm going fishing thing. Like, I love the fish. I know you all, probably a lot of you in the room like to do that as well. But I want to show you how Peter was in error in this statement, all right? He said, I'm going fishing. And they said to him, we'll come also with you. And they went out and got into the boat. And that night, they caught nothing. But when the day was now breaking, Jesus stood on the beach, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. And Jesus said to them, children, do you not have any fish, do you? And they answered him, and they said, no. And he said, I love this, cast your net on the right side of the boat, and you'll find a catch. Like, I've taught this, like, this part for years. I taught this part, like, they didn't know it was Jesus. But if I was a professional fisherman and someone that wasn't a professional fisherman came and said, have you tried throwing your net on the other side? I'd have been like, no, knucklehead, I hadn't tried that. Right? Like, it's silly. I've joked before, other places I've joked that, like, because the way we do, the denomination I'm involved, there's boards and there's things like that. And sometimes people tell you how to do the church. And I'm like, you haven't thought about it except for those 10 minutes on your way to church all week long. Like, how dare you tell me how to do this? But anyway, it's a whole other thing. So anyway, have you caught any, I probably shouldn't have said that. And he said, cast the net on the right side of the boat, you'll find a catch. And so they cast, and then they were not able to haul it in because of the great number of fish. It's incredible. Therefore, the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. And so when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment on, for he had stripped for work. He threw himself into the sea, but the other disciples came in the little boat. But they were not far from the land, but were about 100 yards away, dragging the net full of fish. And when they got out on the land, they saw a charcoal fire already laid with fish placed on it, and bread. And Jesus came and said to them, bring some of the fish that you have now caught. And Simon Peter went up, drew the net to the land, full of large fish, 153, and although there were so many, the net was not torn. Okay, so here's what I want to propose this morning. Okay, so Jesus had died. Jesus had been resurrected from the dead. He hadn't yet ascended unto heaven, but Jesus had died. Now, we know that he had told the disciples, I'm going to rise again on the third day. Like, we know this, okay? And so he had actually told them in Luke 24, I'll probably hit this verse a little bit later, but Luke 24:49, he says, after I die, ascend to heaven, he says, go and wait until you receive power from on high, right? Go and wait in Jerusalem to receive power from on high. So he tells them, gives them instructions what to do after all this happens, okay? And then you get to 21 verse 3. Jesus had showed himself. Jesus had told them what to do. And you get to 21:3 and Peter goes, I'm going fishing. Peter wasn't a hobby fisherman, right? Like, I'm a hobby fisherman, not a professional. Right? I got some professional fly fishermen in my church, as a matter of fact. Can't do that at all. I can't figure this thing out, right? But Peter was not a hobby fisherman. Peter was someone that did it vocationally. This would have been before he met Christ. Like, this was how he supported himself. This is who he was. This is what he'd always done. This is what he was good at. This is what he had identified as, in lack of a better way of saying it. And beloved, I would propose to this morning that when things don't work out the way that we think that they're going to work out, when you start to go through a hard time, when you start to go through difficult seasons, when you're walking through the valley of the shadow of death, aren't you thankful by the way that Psalm 23 says that even though you walk through it, I'm thankful that it doesn't say even though you pitch a tent or build a house in the valley of the shadow of death, right? Which insinuates that you're going to get through it eventually. Right? It may be Some it may be longer, some may be shorter, but you're going to get through it eventually. I'm thankful for that truth. But here's Peter, goes through a hard time, and immediately he goes back to what he's good and what he's proficient at. And I think this is important because many of you this weekend, not everyone was here last 2 nights. Since you said I have no time, I ought to preach the first 2 messages and then go back into this one. No, I'm kidding. Many of you had encounters with the Lord over the last weekend, weeks, months, years. And there's going to be times in your life where you're tempted to go back in to what you're good at and what you're comfortable with. Even in like pastoral ministry, like we came up the road and we're pastoring a church in Iowa, and the church that we're pastoring was it was a very seeker-friendly church. That's the way they'd done things for the last 2 decades, like prim, proper, slick, and nice. I'm nice, but the rest of it, that's not me, right? There's nothing prim and proper about this. And then they were like, and I say this, and I say this lovingly, like they were like, if someone would come and do announcements, they had tape on the floor. That's where you stood, right? I mean, they were like that serious. Or like they would ask me, like, they would print out the order of service, and they'd be like, are you going to preach for 35 or 38 minutes this week? And I'm like, I don't know. Everything was a nice production. And we're like, yeah, we're not doing any of that. Don't care about that. We're going to do what y'all's doing here. Like, we're going to go after the presence of God. If he shows up, we're going to take that order of service, we're going to wad it in the ball and throw it in the trash and just roll with it. Because God can do more in a moment than you can do. Listen to me preach for 12 hours straight. Like the Lord is what's important. But the temptation is like, initially we start growing. Initially, we start seeing the Lord move, and we really have seen the Lord move quite a bit. We start growing, but then people start grumbling. Imagine that, Christians grumbling. Start grumbling because service was no longer 60 minutes on the dot. Start being an hour and a half, right? And I got to get home to my crock pot of lunch. And it's like, someone's like, someone came up and said, you really need to do better about shortening these services because we're starting to get hungry. And I'm like, well, do you eat breakfast before you come to church? No, maybe you should start. I don't know. Bring a snacky, whatever, right? Bring them for the kids, bring them for the adults. Doesn't matter. Like, the Lord's here. And truth be told, we lost a few people out of that. We actually lost a couple other folks because of some fundamentalist type viewpoints. And the pressure was, well, we've lost these people. And I'm just being transparent, they're big givers. They help support the work of the ministry. Maybe we ought to go back doing what we are good and proficient at. I'm like, I'm not doing that at all. Doesn't make a hill of beans to me. The Lord's going to take care of us, right? And he has. But again, the propensity, some will give your life to Jesus and you get on fire and you start going to church and start surrendering your life. You start serving and everything breaks loose at home. And then you're like, man, maybe I ought to ease up on this because my spouse isn't on fire. Right? Or your old friends no longer recognize you and they're like, we don't want to hang out with you. You're a holy roller. Don't want to do that anymore. Right? And then you're like, well, I miss my friends. And so like things get hard and you're tempted to go back into what is familiar. And that, again, this is what Peter was doing. Peter picks up what he had dropped in the very beginning. He did, right? Mark 1, what did Jesus say? Jesus said, follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men. And it says they dropped their nets and followed Jesus immediately. He dropped his net at the very beginning to follow Jesus, but the moment that really the bank account would have been shut off, because that's what was happening, Jesus died, their income was gone. The moment it gets hard, Peter's like, I got to take care. I've got to take care of things. I got to take care of this. Got to do this. I got to do this. I'm going back to what I'm good at. I'm going back to what is easy for me. I'm going fishing. truth be told, maybe another way to say it is Peter was going back to self-sufficiency. Beloved, you're going to be tempted to go back into self-sufficiency rather than dependency. And I really think self-sufficiency is there's a lot of temptations, but I think self-sufficiency is the biggest temptation for Christians. I think it's the biggest temptation for the church. Because, again, we can look at prospering and growing, like for the church, in the church world in particular. There's many that have taken what Chick-fil-A has done and packaged it and turned it in the church, and then we do what Chick-fil-A does for the church service, and it grows a church. But there's no depth. There's no transformation. It's running people in and out the doors. And I like Chick-fil-A, but I just don't think that's how we ought to do kingdom business. And so self-sufficiency, this is what's wild, is Peter still believed in Jesus, right? I mean, he did. He still believed in Jesus. He still loved Jesus. Peter needs to provide. We used to do things this way. We used to do things that way, right? We know if we do things this way, we know the type of results we're going to get. So let's just go do this thing because it's going to be a quick, easy fix. And again, God is in the business of doing new things, and God is in the business of leading people that says, I don't really quite know where I'm going, but I'm going to trust you anyway. Like the Psalm 119 says this phrase repeatedly. It says, the Lord is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path, right? But how many understand most of the time it just feels like he's a lamp unto my feet. Like I see this step, and I see this step. It's not only till I turn around that I see the whole path that was behind me lit up from where I walked. Like wanting to know what 5 steps down the road is not faith, right? That's insurance. That was better than some of you responded, but that's okay. And I think sometimes to get to where God is calling us, like I said, this is overly simplistic, but to get to where God is calling us, we're going to have to go where we've never been before. I mean, it's just like cross the Jordan. You're like, you're going to go on dry ground. Okay. Like, he's going to have us do things that we're uncomfortable with, but it also means that we have to trust him. See, I think it's one thing to have faith in God for my salvation, but I think it's a whole other thing to have trust in him with my day-to-day life and the day-to-day aspects, right? Like, I know the Lord, like, as a parent, the hardest thing in the world is to trust the Lord with your kids. Right? I've got a 4-year-old and a 20-year-old. I've told that story here before too. But like, it was one thing. It's like, it was one thing growing up with my 20-year-old when Ethan was just with us and he was happy and good and fun to be around. But then something happened called 16. And then he was angry and mad all the time, right? And then he started hanging out with people that we didn't. They weren't bad people. They just weren't believers. And then he started being influenced, and I'm like, you can't do that. And then that made him more mad and belligerent. My wife's like, you can't tell him stuff like that. I'm like, yes, I can. I'm his dad, right? And then there for a season, we were worried we were going to lose our son. And then we finally just got to the point where, like, I went to the church in the middle of the night because I didn't know what to do. And I unlocked church, went in, and I went down. And this is what I did. I went down to the altar, and I was pretending like I was carrying my son. And I said, Lord, I'm giving him back to you. All these years, we dedicated him unto you, but I took him off that altar, and I have tried to lead and guide and even control, and I'm going to trust him with you from this day forward, right? And then the Lord started working things out. Like, imagine that, right? Like, it's true. And now he's this incredible worship leader, and he's an incredible preacher, and like the Lord's got his call in his life, and I'm just so thankful. But again, when things get hard, we are tempted to take things out of the Lord's hands and do it ourselves. It never ceases to amaze me. I've said this plenty of times before. It never ceases to amaze me. Like if you got a plumbing issue, like I can do plumbing. I hate doing plumbing, right? But if I got a plumbing issue, I'm going to call a plumber, right? If I got an electrical issue, I'm going to call an electrician. But the moment things go crazy in our life, we try to take it in our own hands and fix it ourselves rather than giving it to the Lord, who's the author and creator of all things. And so he's looking for a people that even when it gets hard, we don't go back to what's familiar. Now, you all's doing this, but we need to learn how to wait on the Lord even in those hard seasons. Luke 24:49, they had been told this, go and wait in Jerusalem until you receive power from on high. King James says go and tarry, right? Go and sink down as if you're sitting. That's what tarry and wait means. Sit down in the Lord's presence and wait until you receive power from on high. They ended up doing that. I've taught this here before, but they ended up doing that, right? They waited, they made their seat in God's presence, and then by the time you get to Acts chapter 2, verse 3, it says, there appeared to them tongues as of cloven fire that came and rested on each one of them. Exact same word, rested is the exact same word as wait in Luke 24:49 in the Greek. So the insinuation is if we can make our seat in God's presence, God's power will come and rest and make its seat upon us. Now, here's what else is wild, is Peter's restlessness influenced others to be restless as well. Go and wait, Pete. Okay, I'm going to go fishing. Again, right? I'm going to go fishing. This is what Scripture says. 21 verse 3. Peter says, I'm going fishing. And those around him said, we'll come with you also. How many understand the decisions that you make don't just affect you, they affect the world around you as well. They affect your friends, they affect your families. It does. When I in our denomination that I'm part of, I have the privilege. I teach pastors to be pastors. I'm a professor, for lack of a better way of saying it. And so they have to take classes that I teach in order to get ordained in our denomination. And I talk to them about the danger of leadership all the time. Because if you're a leader, people's going to follow you no matter what, no matter which direction you're going. Like it's just what the Lord does. And so that's why for me, and let's see, Josh and Whitney, the danger is, if we're not following the Lord, people still going to follow. But then if we can get sanctified and filled with the Holy Spirit, we can say what Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ. Right? I'm trying to walk in his steps. I'm trying to do my best to follow him. And am I going to miss it? Maybe sometimes, yes. But I'm going to do my best to follow him. And the danger of restlessness is that it's contagious. There's not a lot of things that bother me in this world. People write something bad about me on social media, don't care. Don't make a hill of beans to me, right? You don't know me, whatever, it doesn't matter. But what really eats my lunch is when my wife and my kids are going through a hard time. Can't stand it. It makes me, someone says something to my wife that's mean or nasty, like old Michael wants to be resurrected real quick and go break someone's nose, right? Someone does something, says something to my kids, right? And I'm like, let me take care of it. I'll go take care of their dad, and then just so they know that they won't mess with you. Right? That's the temptation. The issue, it's wrong, but the issue is that, again, our decisions don't just affect us. I thought things would look this way. I thought things would have happened like that. I thought it'd been quicker. I thought I'd be further along than I am right now. I thought things would be different right now. We start speaking that stuff out, and then the person sitting next to us is like, me too. I mean, it's absolutely true. I was getting agitated last week, and my wife's like, Michael, she's like, I feel my blood pressure rising. I was like, and? She's like, you need to settle down. And you may not think it, folks, but we don't like. That's what I love about this church. Got all these kids running around during worship. Allowed to be kids. They're getting so much more than you realize. And what they're doing is y'all Selah, and these kids are receiving the ability to Selah when they get older by way of impartation. Like, it's one of these things that the Lord just does. But what happens if, let me phrase it like this, what happens if anything goes wrong at my job and I come home and I'm mad and I'm angry? You know what that's doing? That's teaching my kids that anytime something goes wrong in life, that they have the right to be mad and angry and restless over something. Maybe that's the best way to say it. Like, I just can't overstate the importance. And I'm not telling you fake it till you make it. I'm not doing anything because I think the Lord can come and touch you in a moment and deliver you from all of that. But the moment you give up your seat and posture of rest, it will influence others. All right. So, like, we need to be a people that believe God for just ridiculous things. Like, as a church, like, when I first got saved and when I first got called into ministry, my dream was to see this nation saved. It was like, I'm going to see people saved. It wasn't, man, I hope I can keep the electricity on and keep church people happy. That wasn't my dream. My dream was to see people saved, delivered. My dream was to see my relatives saved, right? You always talk about impossible things during worship. I can't remember who said it, but I thought of these two verses, and I thought, well, good, I'm glad I'm going to share that. Luke 1:37 says that nothing is impossible with God, and then on the other end of that spectrum, Mark 9 says that all things are possible to him who believes. He lives inside of me. Nothing is impossible for him, and all things are possible to him who believes. Let me ask this question. What level of impossibility does God have? Let me phrase it like, what level of restriction and inability does God have? None. What level should we have as a believer? None. All right, just that's fun to talk about, right? So then when things get hard, it's like, you know what? It's hard. I heard a minister say this one time where April and I used to sneak away and we would go and it'd be a respite for us. But he used to say all the time, like, is it good right now? No, it's not. Then it's about to be, right? Because he works all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose, right? Or what the enemy meant for harm, he turns for good. So this hard season that I'm walking in, I can either fall into restlessness or I can hit my knees and say, Lord, I don't know why this is going on, but I want to seek you and I know I want to find you and I want to press in and I want to believe that you're going to turn this thing around at any given moment, God. I'm not giving up my seat of rest. I'm not going to give in to hopelessness. Lord, I'm not going to go back to go fishing. I'm actually going to keep doing what you've asked me to do. I'm going to stay steadfast. I'm going to set my face upon you like flint. I will not move. I will not be wavered. I'm going to stand fast. I'm going to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, right? Your mercies are new tomorrow, right? They're new every morning. Today's today, but tomorrow things are going to change, God. I'm going to pray. I'm going to fast, and I'm going to believe, Lord. I will not go back to who I was before because it's comfortable. I will not go back to who I was before because it's easy. I'm going to stay steadfast. He's looking for men and women just like you and I. He says, this is who I am now. That person that was in restlessness, he's been dead, buried, crucified with Christ, and he's been made a brand new creation. Not going back to who I was before. Some of you are like, well, I'm not quite there yet. That's okay. You're on the right road. Stay on that road. God changes you in a moment. God changes and transforms you in a moment, but it's a lifetime of growing in his grace. Stay on that road. And we'll land it here. Josh said, don't you dare look at the clock. I'm not. but it's not a long message because I want to pray. Because I think it's just a really simple truth. Some of you are going, yeah, but those knuckleheads end up catching a bunch of fish when they threw it on the other side. This is what I think. I think the Lord in his goodness, this is what I believe. Some of you may go back to what you were familiar with, and you can have a really good life. You can. It may even be somewhat fruitful. But you are going to miss out on what he wants to do. Look what happens. Look what happens in this. This is amazing to me. And he said to them, cast on the right-hand side of the boat, and you will find a catch. So they cast, and when they were not able to haul it in because of the great number of fish, therefore the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. By the way, just a fun fact, that it's John. I love that John didn't name himself in the gospel that he wrote. He identified himself as the one whom Jesus loves, which says to me that John thought the most important thing about me as a human being is that Christ loves me. Right? And when you start to understand and identify as beloved, I've taught through Song of Songs here before, but when you start to identify as beloved, first and foremost, not by your job title, not by husband, dad, carpenter, whatever, not by pastor, preacher, evangelist, author, like not by any of those things, but the very most important thing about me is that he calls me beloved. What happens is I can recognize the Christ in the middle of hard situations. He saw him, right? He said, is the Lord. And in Peter, he just believes everything he says, right? Anything, Peter just, I've heard this said so many times, but I still think it's funny. Like Peter's like the shoot first, aim later guy. And I relate to that. But Peter, he put on his outer garment and he threw himself into the sea. Peter was fruitful in a moment, picking up what he had dropped. Right? Jesus said, do that. Peter was fruitful in that moment. But once he realized that Jesus was on the shore, he said, I don't care about being fruitful. I want to be where he's at. I don't care about what I did. I want to go be where he's at. Now, to me, it gets even better, right? Because now think of this. They hauled in all those fish. I love eating fish. I hate cleaning fish. I really don't like to clean fish at all. I don't mind doing a deer. Don't mind doing a hog. I don't like gutting fish. Just don't care for it at all. Right? Like they would have had to taken all them fish. They had to clean them and get them ready to eat. And this is what the Lord does. They got out on the land and they saw a charcoal fire already laid and fish placed on it and bread. You know what I think this is a picture of? I think this is a picture of you can be self-sufficient, but you're going to have to work yourself to death. Or you can keep doing what you're doing and the Lord's going to send supernatural provision and breakthrough. Right? Peter jumps ashore. I love it. Only in neon can I hear polished turd and baby music in a church service. She said it. I didn't mean to embarrass you. I love it. Oh, man. So Peter jumps in, and Jesus has breakfast waiting on him. I don't know, man. Again, I like to eat fish. Don't particularly care to clean them. I like catching them, and I don't like doing the work afterwards. Maybe that's a good way to say it. And here's this Jesus that's on the shore that has everything that they were working for anyway, waiting on them. And so I say today, church, again, as an individual, there's going to be times of uncertainty. There's going to be times of difficulty. There's going to be times where you're just not sure what to do next. There's going to be times where you're going to be tempted to quit. You know, there's going to be times where you're like, man, I have went to prayer meeting a month in a row and nothing's happened in my life that I've been praying for. Right? Or there's going to be times where like you have an encounter with God and the very next day something terrible happens. It's like, why in the world that happened? I'm not prophesying that, just life. That's the way things happen sometimes. Or as a church, you all have, I know some of your story, like you've been candid. You started off seeker friendly and then you start seeking the presence of the Lord and you shrank your church. Right? And now the Lord, the last few years, is beginning to do stuff again. Because of that, it's going to be fruit that remains. And because of that, though, I say because of that, like the more you press into the Lord, the harder the enemy wants to fight. I don't think there's all around this nation, there's a church on every corner, right? I don't think the enemy's afraid of a church. I think the enemy's afraid of a church that actually prays and actually believes what they say that they believe. Right? And so the one on the corner that's not seeking after the presence of God, they're going to keep doing what they do until eventually all of them go off and go to glory. But then the one that's seeking after the heart of God, people's going to walk through trials and tribulations and walk through difficult seasons and walk through the valley of the shadow of death or experience dark nights of the soul. But it's because of that group of people that's pressing into the heart of the Lord, and the enemy's like, I'm shaking in my boots because of that group of people. And we have the option because the Lord gives us free will. He's sovereign, but he gives us free will that we can make the decision, come hell or high water, I will not be shaken, right? I will not be turned. I will not be discouraged. I will not follow into this. Like, I know, and I heard someone else say this another time. I can't remember the minister that said it, but it seems like the harder hell fights, the closer you are to breakthrough. Like I say to you, like the harder it's been, like the closer you are to breakthrough, right? Like this is what, I think this is the good news of the gospel. Not that you're going to go through a hard time, but he's promised to be with you through that. And when I get through that hard time, he is my exceedingly great reward. I think that's why Peter was like, oh, it is the Lord. I didn't recognize him, but that's the Lord. Girded up his loins, I think is what the King James says, right? And jumped, I love that phrase, like jumped in the water. And it's like, I'm ready for breakfast. So I'm going to pray. And what I'd like to pray is, I'm going to pray two specific prayers. I'm going to pray one just over individuals, okay? And then before we finish, Pastor, I just want to pray a prayer over the church that, like things look different because we're following the Holy Spirit. Like but the heart and mission and vision does not change, right? Like we're doing things different today than we did a year ago. That's just the nature of it. So I think that's why Paul said the first distinguishing mark. Now, I'm not saying people are apostles. That's what I'm saying. But Paul said the first distinguishing mark about an apostle, which means someone that's sent, someone that's living on mission, was that they have a spirit of perseverance. Like they don't quit when things get hard. Right? They don't take their ball and go home. Anyone know those kids, like growing up? I'm old enough that we still played outside growing up, right? Some of you know what I'm talking about. And then there was always the one kid in the neighborhood that anytime they lost, they grabbed their ball and they went home. Like, we're not going to grab our ball and go home. We're just going to stay in the game. We're going to stay steadfast. So what I'd like to do is this, and I realize it's Sunday, and this is where sometimes we got to act like we have it all together. We joke at our church a lot, like people try to act like they have their ducks in a row, and I'm like, I don't have a clue where my ducks are, let alone trying to get them in a row. But if you're in here today and you're like, you know what, I have been going through a difficult season, and I need the grace of the Lord. Because there have been mornings where I've been tempted to quit. There have been mornings where I've been tempted to give up. There's been days where I'm just like, man, I'm going to go back to what it was when it was easy. When we first went in the pastoral ministry, I got really, really, we started seeking to do whatever we could do to grow our church. It was pastoring in Natchitoches, Louisiana. Doing whatever we do to grow the church, and the thing is, the more we tried, the harder it got. Because I say the harder it got, the more we tried, the more frustrated we became because the church didn't grow. Our first Sunday, there were 12 people there, and 3 of them was myself, my son, and my wife. We'd followed a minister that had taken his life, and so French, Cajun, Creole culture, everyone thought your church was cursed in town. And for 2.5 years, we tried absolutely everything, and nothing worked. 2012 hits, and I'm ready to quit because we're starving to death too. We'd given up. It doesn't matter how much we were making, but I'll just say that we'd given up some pretty big salaries to go count pennies to eat ramen noodles. And I thought, Lord, I'm ready to quit, because I can go back to what I was doing before and I can provide for my family. Because that's what a man should do. The Lord said, okay, if that's what you really want to do. I was ready to quit. Got a phone call from a pastor named Pastor Steve Hunt that pastored about 15 minutes from us. And Pastor Steve said, the Lord spoke to me. I'm going to this conference. You're supposed to come with me. I said, I can't go to that conference. This is what I told him. I can't go to the conference. One, because he said, you can split the fuel, get you a room, you can come with me. You can ride with me, though. I'm like, Steve, I can't. Like, we're struggling to make it. Like, we've been fasting this week, and it's not because for spiritual reasons. Right? My son didn't go with that. We always made sure my son didn't even know what was going on. And I said, I just can't. And I said, my wife just got a job, and my wife is driving 90 minutes to work and 90 minutes from work. And we have one vehicle. I actually ride a bicycle to get to the church at this time. And I said, so I can't do any of that. And I said, and because of that, I don't have anyone to watch our son, because where my wife's working so far away, I'm the primary caregiver in this season of our life. And he says, okay, no problem, Michael. No problem at all. Within 10 minutes, Pastor Steve calls me and says, here's what I did. I called my church. We switched my room from a single room to a 2-bedroom. So my church is going to pay for your hotel room. My church has decided that you don't have to help pay for any fuel. My church is covering all the fuel. For your food, my church has decided to go ahead and give you a per diem, which means that you'll be able to eat while you're there. So it's not coming out of your pocket. I also called your church board secretary in the last 10 minutes, who lives behind you. He did. And John has agreed to take care of Ethan when your wife goes to work. And so he says, so now what are you going to do? I'm like, I guess I have to go. So I go, and on my way there, I remember telling the Lord, if you don't give me something to fix my church, I'm quitting, because I am tired of this struggle. And I walk in, and it's Pastor Corey Jones's church, and this Pastor Josh and Whitney have been to the Awakening before, but this was back when it was still in Corey's church, before it had outgrown and became something totally different. I walked in that church, and for the first time in my life, I sensed the tangible, weighty, manifest presence of God. And I said, Lord, I just want this for the rest of my life, whatever this is. And the Lord said, it's not your church that needs fixed, it's you that needs fixed, because you're ready to quit. So I went and laid up front around the altar for probably 4 hours. They're doing service, and I'm just weeping like a baby. next morning, like, I'm like, I've never felt this. I just want to be back in that building. Steve's like, hey, do you want to go get breakfast with me at 7? I'm like, can you actually just drop me off at the church? And he goes, they're not open. I'm like, actually, the workers are going to be there. I checked what time they get there, and I just want to go sit in the sanctuary where the workers are doing all their stuff. So I go and I sit there, and for the next 3 days, I didn't go and eat. I didn't go and drink anything. I really didn't even get up to go to the restroom. That's a true story. Because I was afraid I would never get to experience what I'd experienced again. And as I'm there, I'm sitting in that environment and I'm telling the Lord, okay, Lord, like, I'm not going to quit, but you're going to have to help because I don't know what to do. And the Lord said, go repent to your church. Okay, I'll do that. So I get home that week after that conference and I tell my church, I am sorry that I have led you to be a church that's really has multiple personalities. Because we're doing this, this, and this, it's like throwing spaghetti against the refrigerator hoping something sticks. And I said, I feel like we have 2 options. I can resign right now and God can send you a pastor that you all deserve. Or if you would trust me, I'll do my best to make us a house of prayer. And we're just going to seek after the presence of God this day in and forward. They all started rushing me. I didn't know, like, I was a little jumpy. Because I'm like, I don't know if they're going to tackle me or what. They came and laid their hands on me and said that they loved me. And for the next 2.5 years, that's all we did was pray. And the church began to grow. And as we prayed, we had people get sick. We had funerals. As we prayed, we had people that left. And we didn't know how we were going to pay the church's bills. But we continued to pray, and the Lord would send checks in the mail from someone that attended the church 50 years ago that had long, or estates started to send it. Like, it was just crazy what the Lord did. I don't know why I tell you that other than I know it gets hard, but I also think that if you press through, it's worth it. So don't go back to going what's comfortable. So the first group I want to pray with is this, is you're going through a hard time. You've been tempted to go back to what is familiar and easy. And I just want to pray that's not even a thought. Not even a thought. You don't even entertain that. Right? There's some thoughts that's within, and there's some thoughts where the enemy tries to get a foothold and where you come in agreement with it. And so if you're in the room, you're like, man, I've been tempted to go back to the way life was before. Just by way of being bold. I'm not going to ask you to come down front because what I'm going to do is ask the people next to you to pray. But if that's you, I'm going to ask you to just stand up real quick and we're just going to pray a quick prayer.